Good morning, everyone. We will start our webinar just after 9:30. I'm going to give a little bit more time for more people to join. So should be starting very, very shortly. So welcome, everybody. I'm just checking the time to see. Yeah, it's a little just at 9:30. So I'll give it about another 30 seconds and then we can kick off our discussion just to allow as many people as possible to join us this morning. Great. Okay, I think we'll kick off. Hopefully, the numbers might grow as we go on, but we've got an hour for this, so I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time. So welcome everyone to this Morgan Hunt webinar this morning, Navigating Change, Menopause in the Workplace. Perimenopause and menopause will and does affect a significant portion of the workforce and population, half of that, in fact, yet it's often overlooked, and very often, all too often, women still are simply left to get on with it, particularly in the workplace, with very little support from their employers. So we want to discuss that this morning and give some more tips to employers and to employees in terms of how to navigate. My name is Claire Canary, and I'm a director at Morgan Hunt, and I focus on diversity and inclusion, both internally and externally, supporting our client base here at Morgan Hunt. Morgan Hunt are an award-winning national recruitment business, and we have offices in London, Birmingham, Manchester, and Glasgow. But I am delighted to introduce my three expert guests this morning who will help us explore this topic and provide guidance to individuals and organisations. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Daniels. Stephanie is the founder of Life Begins at Menopause and a coach who uses her own experience of the corporate media sector to now support executive level employees and midlife women navigate the workforce. Next, a warm welcome to Hazel Hayden, a menopause specialist and founder of the Bristol Menopause Clinic. Hazel is also a consultant nurse, and she trains other healthcare professionals in menopause. And finally, a welcome to Jenny Haskey. Jenny is Chief Operating Officer of the Menopause charity. Jenny is passionate about patient-centered care, and the Menopause charity supports and provides information to those experiencing menopause, as well as to friends, family, employers, and to healthcare professionals. So we have a great panel lined up this morning. Just a quick point on our format. The session will last about an hour. I will endeavour to leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers, and you can post your questions on the YouTube chat channel, and like I say, we'll endeavour to answer as many as possible of those. So I'm going to start with you, Hazel, if that's okay, just to really kick off our conversation this morning. I think it's important, despite the fact, as I've already said, menopause does and will affect 50% of the population, it's still so infrequently discussed. Can you give us an overview of what perimenopause and menopause actually is, Hazel?
Okay, yeah, of course. Thanks, Claire. Lovely to be here this morning. Yes, so menopause is the time when we have our ovaries stop working, and because of that, we basically run out of eggs in our ovaries. And when that happens, it means we're no longer producing any estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and they're really important for women's well-being and our menstrual cycle. But perimenopause, so menopause is the end of periods, and it's considered a year after the final period. But perimenopause is the years leading up to your period stopping for women. And often this is when symptoms can be worse, because estrogen levels are going up and down like a yo-yo, because running out of eggs, our ovaries aren't reacting to some hormones that are produced. And so because of that, estrogen levels will go up and down like a yo-yo. At the same time, women are also losing their progesterone. Progesterone is our calming hormone, helps us relax and sleep. And because we're losing that as well, we get into complete turmoil. And then there's the whole issue of testosterone on this side of that, which is another issue as well, which although we don't lose our testosterone, if we haven't got enough estrogen on board, then actually we can lose the testosterone as well, because it gets bound up into another protein. That means that we lose our confidence, we lose our joy in life, as well as losing libido. But for women at work, losing that estrogen can have an absolutely devastating effect on their work capabilities.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Hazel. That is very comprehensive. And Jenny, if I could come to you next. I mean, I think we've all seen it, and if we're looking at both perimenopause and menopause, the common effects, and Hazel mentioned one or two there, and I know it's a very long list, but can you give us an idea of what the common issues and effects that women can experience during both peri
of course. I mean, there's over 34 symptoms. So there are so many different symptoms that it would be very difficult to explore. And we always encourage everybody to look at a symptom tracker, because quite often people might identify one or two symptoms, and then actually, especially when I go to events and we look at this, it's not a game of bingo. We're not trying to aim to get a full house. But it can be really helpful to start to join the dots. So we may recognise some symptoms that we talk about. So particularly people are very familiar with hot flushes. We know and we understand that it is a time where maybe our periods are fluctuating and changing. But really, if we think about the effects in the workplace, I think it's really important that we tackle the taboo that menopause is just simply about hot flushes and simply about that time when our periods slow down or fluctuate or come to an end. Because particularly in the workplace, we have to consider the psychological symptoms. They are so challenging. We know that the symptoms of perimenopause and menopause impact our daily lives, our day-to-day lives, but particularly in the workplace, it can just be crippling. Studies show that women describe the difficulty in sleeping and brain fog as being difficult or very difficult. And that actually is far higher than people that talk about the difficulties of hot flushes and night sweats. So it is that sleep, it is that brain fog, it is the feeling of, as Hazel put so well, that loss of interest, the dwindling confidence. In the workplace, it is those symptoms that can be often the most challenging. It can also prevent us and make it more difficult for us to maybe have the confidence to open up and talk about it too. So having that knowledge and that understanding that it's not just the physical symptoms, it's not just the taboo of menopause is just around hot flushes, wild rage. It's the psychological symptoms. And there are some physical symptoms as well, that if you are office-based or on a shop floor or a teacher, can equally be very difficult if you are experiencing flooding. Well, yes, if you are having those hot flushes, the sweats during the day. So yes, a very long, exhaustive list. It's important to understand enough of the symptoms to be able to join the dots and understand, really.
Yeah, because I guess half the battle is appreciating that what you're going through. It's just, you know, because it can be so much going on if you're working and you have a family at that stage in life as well.
I think it's also important to recognise, and this is why talking about it, and talking about it in a good way, in a natural way in the workplace, so normalising the conversation around menopause is important. If somebody wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning and is feeling anxious, is struggling, might have low mood, if they're in their early 40s, which is often when their psychological symptoms can start to happen, they're not going to turn to their phone and Google menopause. They're going to be worried about anxiety. They're going to be worrying about their low mood. They're not going to be necessarily have joined the dots of, I'm coming to the time of life when maybe my periods are changing. Because a lot of women talk about it, so psychological symptoms first, and they haven't experienced any change in their periods. So this conversation is really important to help women who, like I say, at 3 o'clock in the morning are turning to their phones for help, but haven't joined the dots of perimenopause.
Yeah, great. No, that makes complete sense. And Stephanie, if I could just come to you, you know, just in terms of thinking about this topic, it's not widely appreciated, but there are certain health conditions, certain treatments, perhaps, you know, cancer treatments that women go through that can contribute to early or premature menopause. And about 5% of women, apparently, on a study I looked at, can go through early menopause. And that's also probably very startling for them, but also a challenge for their employer, because, you know, they might be much younger women. They're not over 40, but that's happening. So can you talk us through that, Stephanie?
Yes, first of all, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. Apologies, I'm slightly bummed up, but we come as we are. I can only speak from lived experience with this. So, excuse me. So I actually smashed into the menopause at 37 with no prior warning. There was no perimenopause. I had the BRCA gene, spelled BRCA, which is the one that makes you more susceptible to getting ovarian or breast cancer. And so I took the steps to remove my ovaries, and that smashed me into menopause. Other people have different stories. So some, unfortunately, get cancer and they have to undergo treatment to prevent any further damage. And others it's hereditary. So their mums went through it early and they go through it early. I didn't speak to anybody about it apart from one lovely lady at my work. She was of colour. And so we would have these water cooler moments where she would moan about being a woman of colour in a predominantly white man's team. And I would have these moments where I would moan about the menopause. And we would quietly scuffle away and talk about it. And when I got the confidence and I realised that we can talk about this openly, I started to change the narrative. And you're talking about the 5% in the workplace, but it just takes one person to say, this is what I'm going through, this is what I'm experiencing. As Jenny says, join the dots and work out that we're not sleeping because of X, Y, and Z. Anxiety is a part of that. Fluctuation in hormones, as Hazel said, is another part of that. It's multifactorial. And once we start understanding that and speaking up for other people, it's amazing how many other people start putting their hand up and saying, thank you for talking, I feel the same. Yeah. And through that understanding and that awareness, we can start the conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Stephanie. God, that's quite stark, though. You're saying, you know, smashing into menopause at such an early age and you just weren't expecting it. Did anyone, just as a follow-up to that, did anyone from a medical perspective give you any advice that that would happen, or was it more focused on the procedure you were going through?
And I love the medical industry. I'm just putting this disclaimer out there. My mum unfortunately passed away from ovarian cancer, which is why I took the steps to undergo preventative.
Yeah.
And they kept her along for much longer than she would have been. So I have nothing but love for them. When it came to this situation of me having my oophorectomy, my ovaries removed, there was a leaflet that was handed to me on the way out of the hospital talking about HRT, and that was it. And through my own research, I optimized my symptoms one by one and managed to overcome them. So the GP was doing the best that they could. They gave me an antidepressant and they gave me what's called synthetic HRT, and then sent me on my way, and that was it.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure that's quite a common experience even now. So that's crazy. Hazel, I could see you nodding your head, but I was going to come
because the thing is, the big thing to say about menopause is it should be looked at, and things like what happened to you, Stephanie, really it needs to be looked at holistically, not just. And what happens with can happen is you get one bit looked at, like Jenny was saying, like the anxiety gets looked at, but actually nobody joins the dots, like Jenny was saying, about it all coming together. And when you've had a diagnosis like Stephanie's had, and you've had all that done, then often everyone's at a loss. What do we do next? And that can have a huge knock-on effect for women, because not only are you feeling anxious because you've had this diagnosis and you've had this treatment, but also what you're going to do next. How, you could have up to 30 years post, possibly 45 years if you're only in your 30s, where you're managing with no estrogen in your body. And estrogen is so important to women because we've got estrogen receptors in every cell of our bodies. And that's why the effects of the lack of estrogen are so devastating to women at times. But not having it, but there is a holistic thing that we should be looking at,
rather than compartmentalizing it like
absolutely. That. And that's a really hard bit. And that's where the whole symptom checker is quite good, really good, because it does bring all that together. But actually it's getting the right support in that situation as well.
Yeah. And Hazel, if I could ask you, I've come across some research which looked at Black and ethnic minority women from 2022, but I'd heard this before, that there are differences in terms of the onset of perimenopause and menopause for those groups of people, those groups of women. So on average, it's something like 8 months earlier, but I'm guessing that's an average. Right. So
actually, so with white Caucasian women in the UK and the US, the average age of menopause is usually 51, they say. Although I did see something yesterday saying it might not happen till they're 58 now. There's some new research, new toolkit out. But actually, for women of Southeast Asian origin, they might well start having their menopause, proper menopause, where periods start disappearing at the age of 47. And Black and African and Caribbean women, it might happen at 49. So they might well be perimenopausal and start suffering with anxiety younger than Caucasian women.
Yeah,
so it's important to be aware of that as well. That's the big thing.
That's quite a big difference, isn't it?
It is. Yes, it is a huge difference. It's 4 years between Caucasian women and Southeast Asian, and it's 3 years almost between Caucasian women and Black and Caribbean and African women.
Yeah, great.
And of course, they all get slightly different symptoms as well. And that's the other thing to talk about, really. I think Jenny's hanging in there, waiting to come in about that. But yeah, they do.
The symptoms present quite differently as well.
Absolutely.
There's a different response to treatments. So this is why menopause information, it's really important that, especially in a world where we're trying to tackle the misinformation, that we recognize that the information that is out there is trusted, but it is also relevant and tailored. And so that's another consideration for companies to be thinking about in terms of how they're discussing menopause in the workplace and considering everybody across their organization, including disabled people with disabilities, experience symptoms far more severely, but also working class women are actually represent kind of probably a greater significance of women who suffer from severe symptoms. So important that, everybody's menopause journey is very different, but there can also be very cultural reasons that mean that journey is different too.
Yes, wow, that's really interesting. And Jenny, if I could could just come back to you, I mean, you know, this seems silly question to me, but I suppose, you know, still this is not a conversation that happens every day, but the business case for employers taking perimenopause and menopause more seriously and trying to engage with their employees and support their employees. What do you see in your, you know, day to day, the benefits to an employer of taking that kind of approach?
Well, I think that if we start with a question, why should companies take this seriously? Almost half of the women studied recently said that their ability to work had been affected. 61% had said that they'd lost motivation because of their symptoms and their confidence. So if we just consider those symptoms alone, that tells us a lot. But I think the headlines that will make companies sit up is 1 in 10 women leave the workforce because of their menopause symptoms. And they don't need to, they shouldn't have to. So that's huge. 14% of women have reduced their hours at work. Again, with the right support, with right education, with access to treatment or supportive readjustments, then we don't need to leave women who contribute so much to our economy, contribute so much to our workforce. Let's look at the NHS and consider the devastating impact that menopause can have. Then this is why companies, organisations should sit up and do something.
Yeah.
8 women, 10 women had said that their employer hadn't shared information, they hadn't trained staff, they hadn't put in place a menopause policy. So, you know, that's the impact if a company doesn't take this seriously. And if we think about how companies can really help, then actually, you know, there's a direct impact that that companies can have. So like today, sharing that information, encouraging women to seek help and support from a GP. Almost half of women of menopausal age haven't been to see a GP about their symptoms. So actually, if we can help encourage, allow the time and the space for women to go and see their healthcare professional, encourage them and not just share the negative stories, then actually workforces will improve. Companies will see a positive impact rather than seeing, you know, fantastic women not taking promotions, not taking up those leadership promotions, or like I say, 1 in 10 women leaving the workforce, which we don't want.
Yes.
I think the other thing I just wanted to add to that, Jenny, and which is sort of what you touched on really, is women don't want to talk about it because of the stigma, because they say, I've got this problem, and then everyone goes, whoa, it's all a bit like, whoa, I don't want to talk about it. And I think that's a huge issue in the workplace. And the more open everybody is, for companies to support these women, because as Jenny said, these women offer so much, and particularly in places like the NHS, there are women who are often in higher grades of jobs. They've got to the top of their career. We shouldn't be losing these women in the workplace because they're so brilliant at mentoring and supporting younger staff who are at the start of their career or in the middle of their career, to get them to go better, because women are naturally really good mentors because of their nurturing, even though you lose nurturing bits when you're menopausal, but postmenopausal, but it's still really important that we talk about it so much.
Yeah, well, you're losing them, or they're disengaging, or they're not going for promotions, or they're leaving the workforce at a time where they're at their peak, really, and they're most valuable, which just seems, well, is crazy. Yeah, that makes sense. And Stephanie, if I could come back to you, I mean, you know, there may be organizations listening this morning who don't have massive amounts of resources, but they want to help their female workforce, and they want to, you know, maybe start looking at what they could offer in terms of support. So if you were advising an organization, you know, they were starting from scratch, and they were looking to build out support, what kind of what tips would you give them, Stephanie?
Yes, thank you. That's a good question. And let's talk about what we can do with minimal funds that will have the biggest impact on their working life. And I can only go by what some of my kind of clients do currently successfully. And just as another disclaimer, starting somewhere imperfectly is better than starting nowhere perfectly, right? So just be brave and take a step forward. So there's kind of a couple of things that come to mind. Creating a survey, very little cost, if at all nothing. There's applications online that you can get. I think SurveyMonkey is one. And creating those open questions. So what do you need? What will make your working experience better? How can we optimize life for you? So those really open and engaging questions, taking into account the culture that you want to create in a workplace. So you can do that, the employees can do that. The other thing that was done really successfully is creating a support network. So whether that be a women's network in this case, not discriminating on age, going back to your first question, or whether we create some kind of safe space. I don't know what that looks like, but that's, that's a kind of starting point. And then the third thing is we've had a surge in mental health trainers. And as we've established through this talk, menopause is multifactorial and you can optimize each symptom. I'm speaking from experience here, if you truly listen to your body. And so educating these mental health first aiders on this stage of life will empower them to handle those conversations effectively. They're the first kind of three that come to mind. Yeah. If you have budget, then you can obviously invest in other things, but they're the ones that come to mind that are free, really.
And doable. Sorry, Hazel, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, and that's really good what you said, Stephanie. Yeah, and I think that is true that menopause comes so much into mental health first aid as well. But there's also practical things like ventilation of the workplace, cold water, what your uniform's like, whether it's comfortable. Some of these women might get bloated in the middle of the month, and if you've got a restrictive uniform on, that's really hard. A restroom, menstrual products as well, because women in perimenopause, because of that estrogen up and down, then restrooms and toilets that are available for them to go, and they've got menstrual products in, if they're it is a particularly big problem for teachers and around all that as well.
No, that makes sense. And Stephanie, I was thinking with this next question of perhaps line managers, maybe might be younger, they're not maybe they're not mental health first aiders. They can be young men or indeed young women, not being sexist here, because I think if you haven't been through this, or seen maybe someone in your family or friend group go through it, then you might not have the awareness. So what advice would you give to those line managers who might be trying to support women? They're the front line trying to support women who are going through this, but have very little experience and perhaps aren't very confident about discussing it.
I think just admitting that you don't know is okay. People are not going to bite your head off and say to you, what do you mean you don't know? You're a man. People don't expect men to know about it. And so that honesty and that setting the ground rules up front is makes it much more approachable and much easier for the employee to open up. I think cultivating empathy is really good. So they don't understand, that's the first step, and then creating a safe environment where they feel okay to open up. I have one boss in mind who did exactly this. He said, I don't understand and I want to how do I learn more? What do you need? So creating that open communication, he created these confidential one-to-ones, and that built my trust over time. Mm-hmm. And then really tailoring support. Once you get that and establish that information, it's tailoring support to get the best. Listen, at the end of the day, we want the ROI. That's it. These businesses want the ROI. And to get the best ROI, you need to join the dots. I love that, Jenny. You absolutely need to join the dots.
Yeah.
So start with those open communications, that honesty and that safe space.
Yes. Sorry, Hazel, you're going to say
sorry. Also about policies, menopause policies. I went into somewhere recently and their menopause policy was one sheet. That is just putting a little plaster over and a sticky plaster, a little plaster band-aid over a broken leg almost, because actually you need to be having, if you have a menopause policy or a menstrual health policy, they need to be really as a resource for women as well as the business. So for women who haven't joined a doctor, if you've got a general women's health policy and there's easy access to it on your intranet or your business internet, or you've got it there, then women can have a look. And that's another way, as Jenny says, of joining up the dots, because women can take a look at it and then say, and like Stephanie says about listening to your body, a lot of times women are so stressed and so busy being that sandwich generation that they don't know how to listen to their body. And it's if you have a really good policy in place that's got loads of information around how to take care of yourself as well, women are more likely to pick it up, and you're creating a much more open workforce, work policy and an open environment, because it's there for everybody to look at as well. But I think that's brilliant about your manager having one-to-ones, Stephanie. That was brilliant that they picked up on that.
Thank you, Hazel. I think that kind of picks up a little bit on my next question to you, Jenny. Hazel, you talked about a really thorough policy. So that sounds like probably a good place to start in terms of strategy for supporting employees. Is there anything else you'd advise employers in terms of a priority?
I think, Stephanie and Hazel have already shared so many fantastic top tips. I think if we're looking at a strategy, and I agree, about that policy, it's important that we don't just pay lip service. I probably wouldn't start with a policy, actually, because I think, as Stephanie said, this is about culture change. So if we think about a key strategy for employers to really take on board, I think there are 3 core pillars for all organisations to consider. And it's around aiding the conversation. So let's normalise the conversation about menopause. We're not saying to all employers, all line managers, to become menopause experts, not at all. As Stephanie said, we already have ecosystems within the workplace. We have people that can be upskilled and have those conversations. But if we have an understanding, we can aid the conversation, we can normalise the conversation. And let's not rule out men in that conversation. Some of the most powerful conversations I have in the workplace are with men, because leaders quite often see what's happening at home and want to ensure that the struggles that they see their partner experiencing, their colleagues don't face similar, or they learn about it in the workplace and they have that light bulb moment and then can go and support their wives. So the workplace can have a really good twofold effect. The second pillar is education. So ensuring that everybody has access to trusted information. So good sources of information, such as the information from the Menopause charity that's clinically approved, in terms of how people can kind of upskill, get the knowledge, reach the resources that they need, and actually encourage and allow their colleagues, their employees, to go to seek healthcare support. And the third pillar is really about having leadership that's dedicated to tackling the stigma. This isn't something to be tasked to the HR department to go and write a policy and then say, tick, we've done it. Yeah. So I think it's those 3 core pillars are really the strategic approach, and all of the elements, all the adjustments that we've talked about, that cultural change, the training, the advice on menopause, adapting existing policies or incorporating a new policy, flexible work, environmental changes. We know that when companies put those in place, we know that women say that they're helpful. So it's, it doesn't take much.
Yeah. Great. And Hazel, I'm sure you've come across this, but have you got tips for individuals who perhaps are in a workplace and their employer doesn't really have robust support in place and they feel a little bit alone? What tips have you got for them?
Right. Okay. I think it's if that's a really difficult situation, and it does happen. But I think for them, it's trying to find somebody in that workplace who they can talk to, like Jenny says, and I totally agree with everything you said about those pillars, Jenny. And I think it's really important to find someone. It might just be somebody that you work with to talk to, because as Stephanie said about starting up things like women's little cafes, you talk about menopause cafes, but they could be women's cafes, because you want to bring the younger generation up with you as well. And I think that's the big thing. If you've got a little bit, if you're, and I know it's really hard for women who are in the thick of all this, what can be a traumatic experience, but it's just keep those conversations going, because ultimately it will be it will help. But it's about, but it's really important to also really take care of yourself. And like Stephanie said, listening to your body, if you can. If you listen to your body, that will really help you work out where you're struggling and what you're struggling with. And I'm going to, if you're a member of a union, the unions they've got really good menopause support out there as well. So I know that they've done a lot of work around menopause, and they're trying to encourage companies to be much more proactive about it. But it is that women often have to push it themselves. I don't know what you and Jenny think, Stephanie.
Yeah, that sounds, I mean, a union sounds like an obvious, a key one actually, Hazel, but possibly not something people would think of straight away.
Oh, and actually, if you go on the union websites, and if you go on ACAS website, they've got all that really good information already there, that's about what the work they've done. So you don't have to be a member of the union, but you can see that I'm not saying, it's about, you can have a look and see what they've got, because they've done a lot of work on it, and it's worth having a look at that.
Great, thank you. And Stephanie, if we could come back to this, and when we've touched on this actually, when we were talking about, losing women going through perimenopause and menopause because of the challenges, or indeed not even just losing them to, progression and going for promotion because they lose confidence and they feel like they can't. So, I was looking at some studies, men are seen to be kind of in their professional peak in their 40s or 50s. Whereas, there's a little bit of sexism going on there, where women are often seen, over 40 and between 40 and 60 as kind of being dismissed a little bit and middle-aged. And, that's a bit of gendered ageism there. So can you comment on how menopause can kind of contribute to that bias from what you see in your work, Stephanie?
Yeah, I was just going to say, from the clients that I see, again, this is multifactorial, right? So on the one hand, you have the cognitive effect. So you've got the brain fog and that inability to recall information really quickly. So you imagine they're in their jobs, they're asked a question, and with a pressure to answer it quickly, because that recall is blurred, it's really difficult. And that leads into stress, which is a physical symptom, because that will impact their sleep. So they're stressed about their performance at work. They're then not sleeping that night. And then a third part of this is the lack of understanding at work. So they're going into work expected to perform in the same way that they did when their hormones were in harmony, and they are just not. And that perpetuates and perpetuates. And they're turning to alcohol to alleviate that stress, and they're turning to sugar to alleviate that stress. And the way that I was taught at college, I'm a naturopath now and a coach, is to look at the whole person. And so once you start peeling back the layers, once you start looking at the habits and listening to your body, you can start tailoring protocols, plan of action. I've started to have a nasty cold. My immune system is down because I've been working too hard. I know that. And I've got the washing, and I've got the kids, and I'm working, and I have to produce content, and I have to support my clients. And my body is saying to me, Stephanie, you need to just slow down. So that's my body. If I was in a more demanding workplace with men or people who weren't really in the know looking at me like rolling their eyes and laughing because I'm boiling hot, it manifests as anxiety. And so it's so multi-layered. And then you throw that into the mix of stats of people being judged just because of their age. It's a whole mix. I mean, you know, it's hard. But actually, you can empower yourself to take back control. And that's the key point here.
Yeah, right. No, I think, and you know, that was kind of going back to what even Hazel said, you know, that holistic approach. And I think I read somewhere when I was looking at, and there might even have been in that in one of the cases I was looking at, you know, actually women in their 50s and over are one of the biggest or growing a growing population in our workforce, because perhaps we didn't have them in previous generations. So they're going through this. So more and more working women are going to experience menopause transition. And Jenny, I don't know whether you were seeing this, but I think it was 2021, something like a 44% increase in employment tribunal cases that cite the menopause. So clearly women are taking their employers to task about the lack of support. So what's your experience of that, Jenny? And do you think employers start to think, hang on a second, we don't want that to happen again. We don't want anyone to go through that. That's not great.
I mean, it's horrendous, isn't it? And it should be happening. And we are seeing an increase. It's horrendous that it's taken that, but actually at least the headlines then are making more companies maybe sit up and listen. We know that actually it's only in recent years that everybody's got more comfortable talking about menopause anyway. So that is going to couple with a shift of employees, maybe, you know, who have worked or tried or have done their best with their employer to try and resolve this situation and not got anywhere, and ended up in a tribunal. And I think it's really important that actually let's focus on the root cause, because if women are educated, if they can access treatment and have the right support in place, then it doesn't need to get to that. So let's hope we see a plateau on the tribunals, because more companies are putting the right procedures in place. But let's use it as an opportunity for companies not to engage in the menopause conversation as a tick box exercise, as we've already said. So let's not pay lip service to this. Let's not just panic and see, oh gosh, there's an increase in tribunals. We'll have a really exhaustive policy, but we won't do any of the other brilliant things that Stephanie, Hazel and myself have already shared. It doesn't take much to have a supportive culture in place that encourages people to be able to speak up and talk to their line manager.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really important, that we really understand about normalizing this conversation. We do know that even though a lot of companies are finally talking about it, putting in policies, creating support groups, we do know that unfortunately still women don't necessarily feel comfortable disclosing this to their line manager. So we still know that there is a taboo about menopause on our sick notes. We are still worried about the impact of, you know, if I talk about brain fog and how it's affecting my performance, is that going to mean I'm losing my job? So there is still fear. So it's really important that companies recognize that, understand that, and think, okay, how do we encourage our line managers? How do we equip our line managers to have good conversations? Because, like, you know, if women are not going to disclose on their sick notes that their time off is due to menopause because they're still worried, then we will still end up in a situation where women are potentially going to try and not getting the right support. So it is important that, you know, companies really sit up, listen, but recognize that just because you've got a few posters in the office and policy, and that maybe you've done one webinar around it, that doesn't necessarily then mean that women will feel comfortable disclosing this, and you may still run into you know, difficult areas. So what do you need to do? How can you, Stephanie mentioned surveys, how can you make sure that the work that you're doing, the steps that you're taking, are ensuring that women go, actually, my company isn't just paying lip service, because I hear that a lot. I hear a lot of women who are struggling saying, and my company's put a few posters up, as if that's going to make a difference. So think about and ask your employees, engage your employees in the conversation. Is this working? Is what we're doing working? Don't just sit in an office and think this is what everybody needs. Job done. Engage everybody in the conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hazel, I saw you nodding.
I just wanted to add to that, Jenny, is also if you've got a woman who's in the workplace who's a really high performer or is really good, and suddenly you notice that things are not quite the same as they were, be proactive about it. Have a chat with them, because that's often the first sign, and they're struggling a bit, but women don't want to admit it. And I think if you see a woman that you've got in your workplace and she's always been really reliable, suddenly it's taking a few days off sick, or work's not coming in time, or there's something there, then actually I would say it's really important to have that chat with them so that they know that you're aware. And you're not trying to be, it's not a critical chat, but it's a chat around to help them and support them, And you're right, Jenny, people do just pay lip service. Companies do just pay lip service to the whole perimenopause and menopause. And I've spoken to companies, and then somebody in the audience that says, well, actually, I'm on a disciplinary because I'm not sleeping, I've got anxiety, and I'm on a disciplinary because I've been late in 3 times. That's just not right.
Yeah, there's a long way to go.
There is.
And Hazel, I just wanted to, I think you actually touched on the whole mental health piece, and we've mentioned it throughout the conversation, but I think it does kind of underpin a lot that's going on around this time for a lot of women. And I'm not talking about the detail here, because there's been some horrible, high profile, tragic cases recently. But I think they're important because they raise awareness of just how kind of suddenly and severely someone's mental health might deteriorate. So I suppose I was just, coming to you again. I know it'll be a holistic approach, but advice for women, because I noticed in some of those cases that actually those women and their family didn't struggle to really talk to experts who really understood. You say they were just dealing with mental health, and nobody really looked at it holistically and thought, well, hang on a second, is this woman going through perimenopause or menopause? So yeah, what are your, I suppose, tips for women who are struggling with their mental health?
I think, well, it's really hard, because when you've got that anxiety, and Stephanie's probably really good at answering this one, when you've got that anxiety as a woman, it's really hard to see the wood for the trees. A lot of women will present saying that they've got anxiety, but they know it's not depression. That's the big thing. They go, I don't feel I'm depressed. I don't feel like myself, and my anxiety is coming at strange times. It's not generalized anxiety disorder. It's much more acute than that. So it's being aware of, again, what Stephanie said, of being aware of yourself. But it's also things like, if you stress will make that anxiety worse. So it's having a look at that. It is about a holistic view of looking at your body. And when you're in the thick of it, it's really hard to look at that and to think about that. But it's worth having a look at resources of why you are in that position. Is it work? Is it just suddenly happened and it's hormonal? But yeah, sometimes you just want to wave a magic wand so that you can just magically, any woman who's got anxiety, just magically send her information to say, this is what's going to help you. But it's hard. Sure, Jenny and Stephanie have both got similar sort of answers, I'd have thought.
Yeah,
I guess, Hazel summed it up perfectly, but I think this is where sometimes that wider network can see things differently. So as Stephanie talked about earlier, if you have mental health first aiders, upskill them with toolkits around, could it be your hormones? So it's not labeling every woman of a certain age or you must be menopausal, but it's sometimes a subtlety of asking that question, have you considered, could it be your hormones? as Hazel said, sometimes we can't see the wood for the trees, but the psychological symptoms are huge. And they come at a time when we've touched on it's a sandwich generation. We have so much going on at work. We have very busy home lives, either with young children and aging parents, or we've got teenagers. And menopause is puberty in reverse, right? And let's think about, you know, what we accept and understand of teenagers. We know that their hormones cause them to swing from one mood to the next. We know that they sleep an awful lot. Let's consider pregnant women and how we support pregnant women in the workplace, or new mums. We know that their hormonal impact may mean that they have baby brain. They sleep a lot. They need more time. Menopause is the same. It is puberty in reverse. It is hormones fluctuating. So we know all of this, but we don't offer that same protection and that same support and that same understanding for perimenopausal and menopausal women that we probably do for teenagers and pregnant women who are experiencing these same hormonal fluctuations. And there's another thing in that. And as women, when do we ever put ourselves first?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we know that we look at everybody around us before we consider ourselves. And so actually this is a time more than any other when we have to be kind to ourselves first and foremost. And I encourage everybody to find at least 5 minutes every single day, regardless of how busy you are.
Yeah.
5 minutes of every day for self-care. Because when we can start to tackle one element of one symptom, we can start to get through. Don't try and take on everything all at once. If we just tackle one element, it will release the key. It will help us then get through to something else. And I think that overwhelm is really important when we consider the mental health impact during menopause. Yeah. I'm sure you've got lots to add as well.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Sorry.
No, I love that. That epitomizes the empowerment that women need to have, that employers need to give to their staff, that you can absolutely look behind the curtain and see that it's within my power to take back all these symptoms and to overcome them one by one. And once you realize that, exactly, it unlocks the key. We've spoken a lot about plastering a broken leg, for want of a better phrase, but I stand by my saying that doing something, you know, is better than doing nothing. Doing something imperfectly is better than doing nothing perfectly. But it's the what then. So they've got the posters on the wall, what then? And it's that what then that is really, really key for these employers, to continue that conversation and create an open door policy for employees to say that poster is really helpful and it's educating me, but I need support, or I need to be held accountable for the amount of alcohol that I'm drinking, and I don't want to speak to anybody about it. I don't want to admit my alcohol problem to my colleagues, definitely don't want to admit it to my partner, or my sugar addiction, or the fact that I'm on my phone late at night reading really stressful content, or under pressure to reply to that email. It's the what then.
Yeah, actually a lot of this is kind of bringing, you know, in terms of, I think, giving women the authority to be empowered and to take time for themselves. You know, that is a big part of this. I know employers can do a lot, but actually women having the confidence to just go, you know what, time out here. Because, you know, that puberty in reverse piece, Jenny, I mean, you know, you wouldn't be putting the pressure on teenagers because everyone expects it, but we somehow forget it for ourselves. So that's really, really useful. I'm just going to ask one last question. I'll try and then go to a couple of questions that have come in, if that's okay. But it was just kind of going back to, I suppose, employers. And Jenny, I thought I'd come to you on this. You know, there has been the recent report by the Women's Equality Committee on Menopause in the Workplace from the government, and there's been some recommendations, and a lot of those some of them have been pushed back, I noticed. So is there more guidance that the government, you know, you think could put in place, or is looking likely that they will put in place that will help employers?
Yeah, it's, we agree with all of the recommendations, and we feel that, they should be put forward, but there should be more things. But I think we'll continue to work on the government at that top level. But what can we do here? And I love what Stephanie just said in terms of that, but what then? And actually, but what now? What can employers be doing now? And I think it's, when we talk about this, it's really crucial. No one person experiences the same menopause journey. Everybody's journey is unique. And actually, no company is really the same. So what works for one company possibly won't work for the next. So of all of the guidance and all of the tools there's an awful lot of recommendations out there anyway. Companies can't just suddenly go and take something off the box and say, oh, here we go, job done, we've fixed that, because it is really, really unique to your business. That cultural change can't be done by government-led guidance or policies. It's about you, it's about your leaders setting the tone. It's about that cultural piece. As Stephanie was just saying, a poster on the wall isn't really going to get somebody who is really on their knees because of their menopausal symptoms to open up and make a difference, and maybe even get the help that they desperately need. The cultural change within an organization can, and that's why we need the leaders to be taking this seriously, to lead that cultural change around women's health in the workplace, including and recognizing perimenopause and menopause in that. We need companies to be normalizing the conversation around this, and we need good education at the heart of everything. And I think, that's something that we can all take on board ourselves, and we can continue to seek the direction and the support from government. But let's not wait. We know to make a difference now.
Yeah, it could be waiting a bit, and really, this is really important now, and always has been. But why are we waiting even longer for it to be done for us? No, that makes complete sense. I'm just going to go to a couple of questions, if that's okay, because I'm aware we're kind of almost up on time. So recommended menopause. So you mentioned this, I think Jenny, or maybe and Hazel might have as well, but menopause symptom checker or questionnaire where women can keep track of their symptoms. So where can people find those?
Yeah, so I've shared a link. Hopefully that can be popped in the.
We'll share that. Yeah.
We have symptom trackers available on our website. They follow the recommended climatric green scale. People can download awareness packs that include these symptom trackers as well. So there's a couple of links that I've shared. Really handy, the symptom trackers, no matter what stage you are in your menopausal journey, and a great topic of discussion, because like I say, even the most, the women who are quite far into their menopausal journey are accessing treatment, think they're all right. They look at this and then they go, gosh, I didn't know that itchy skin was a symptom. Now I understand why that's
yeah.
So a great source. And there's lots of
good too. Great. And I suppose I'm just going to come back to you, Hazel, given your clinical background. Is there anything, just as a bit of a, because again, I think we've talked about the fact that women just plow on and get on with stuff and almost ignore themselves and don't listen to what's going on with their bodies. So is there anything with those symptoms that if people were seeing them for a prolonged period of time that you would say, actually go and seek some medical advice, go and see your GP? Anything in particular?
Anything in particular? I mean, if you've got there are things, and as Jenny says, with the symptom tracker is brilliant, and also keeping a symptom diary. If you're still having periods, but your premenstrual tension, or you feel before your period you get horrendous anxiety and you feel really low in mood, then that's worth tracking just for a couple of cycles to see, because that can then help as evidence to go to your GP. Actually, it's a sign that even if your period is still regular, it's a sign that things are starting to change. So it's keeping a diary, and a lot younger women now are much better at keeping their period diaries and things like that. But I'd add symptoms into that for women who are starting to feel, I'm not coping so well at work, and that's often the first sign. Or I'm shouting at my kids when I get home at night. That's a classic one. Or I want to throw the the bricks at my husband or something, or the plates are getting smashed. If you start having that, think about doing symptom tracker, but also maybe a period tracker in line with that. Whole diary is really good, but it's also stop, say to everyone, I've got to stop, I need some time, I need to consider me.
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes complete sense. And Stephanie, if I could come to you just for this last question, because I think you've got some thoughts on this. Recommended webinars, podcasts for information people can log on to and listen to instead of just reading, you know, absorb it that way.
Yeah, I think once you go down the rabbit hole of podcasts, you will find what resonates with you. There is a lady called Cynthia Thurlow who did a TED talk on fasting for over 40s. She's actually my mentor, and she has loads of incredible guests. Sometimes it can get quite technical, so I would invite people just to gloss over those if it's too much. But she has some great guests on her podcast. And then there's a lady called Melanie Avalon who talks about biohacking, which is one of my favorite things to do. And that really feeds into empowering employees to take back control of their life and educating them, inspiring them, and then empowering them to move forward. And that takes us to 10:30, so I'll stop.
Yeah. And I do appreciate particularly you, Stephanie. I know you're struggling with possibly COVID symptoms, so thank you very much. So what we'll do though, and if Hazel and Jenny have any other recommendations, they'll no doubt share those with us, and all the links that have been shared. In the next 24 hours, we will send out a recording of the webinar to everyone who's signed up. So, you know, you can go back and listen again to it. We'll also include links to our 3 fantastic speakers so that you can reach out, make contact and look at their, you know, resources, or indeed just, you know, check them out on LinkedIn. But I just want to say, you know, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but thank you to everyone who's tuned in and taken the time out this morning. I found this fantastically informative, and it just, again, that kind of awareness, you know, that we all need every now and again to think about this. But I really want to say a massive thank you to Stephanie, Hazel and Jenny, our 3 wonderful experts. It's been really, really great. Have a great day, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you.